No Rest for the Wicked is an isometric action-adventure RPG Souls-like with a randomized loot, the same type you'd see in Diablo or Destiny, combined with survival and crafting elements and brought to you by the creators of the Ori series, which are Metroidvanias. And after that very long description, I can tell you that this game is exceptional at some of those things, passable at others, and questionably designed at the rest. The team behind it say in the marketing materials that they want to push this genre forward. But the question I had was, exactly which genre? Now, having said this, you might think that No Rest for the Wicked is a mixed bag, and it's not. I think overall, it's fantastic. But what makes it fantastic is constantly bogged down by things that shouldn't be there, including the now ever-increasing trend of games that want to waste your time. And because this game is trying many things, there are in turn many things that I have to say about it. And since it's an early access game, I want my critique to not be just entertaining to you, the viewer, but helpful to the developers. So I'm going to start this review out by highlighting what I think is special and what could have you interested in the game, be that now or later in development. And then I will shift towards a more critical view at its design. And as always, there are timestamps below. I'm Mug Thief, welcome. Let's talk about No Rest for the Wicked. The initial advertisements I saw along with sponsored videos for this game present it as Path of Exile meets Dark Souls, and I don't think that's a good description at all. If you've ever heard people saying that Dark Souls is in many ways a successor to the 3D Zeldas, imagine if Dark Souls was more Zelda, as in old school A Link to the Past style of Zelda. And that's what No Rest for the Wicked in its best moments to me feels like. This is an isometric adventure game with some exceptional map design, some really cool navigational puzzles, great use of shortcuts and that usual From Software design, and a leveling system where you distribute stats in health, stamina, strength, dexterity, faith, intelligence, focus, and equip load. Each weapon has a moveset comprised of a basic combo and a dashing combo or attack, which is the same that you have after you dodge. Weapons also have special runes, up to a maximum of 4 per weapon. Each rune is a special move which spends your focus meter, and to gain focus, you deal damage to the enemies. These runes can be mixed and matched later on to a degree. There are some limitations between weapon types. Combat does feature a slight animation lock, but much more forgiving than anything more traditionally Dark Souls, although its shield system, its use of invulnerability frames, its backstabs, and parries will be very familiar to anyone with experience in Souls. Combat is overall flashy, stylish, and very satisfying, and while it could use more depth and variety as well as more enemies, like everything I'm going to talk about in this video, it is incredibly promising. Some of the key differences from Dark Souls is that you don't have a replenishable health system like an Estus flask. You need to constantly cook HP items, and resource gathering is a big component. You also don't drop your experience or anything when you die, so there's no corpse running, and enemies don't respawn until you've fully left the area or let way too much time pass. So in the game you will navigate areas, fight enemies, get loot, get stronger, and keep progressing through the game, with a couple of optional dungeons right now that are also very well made. And that is the basic loop. Explore, fight, loot. And it works very, and I mean very well. It has so many things I love all together. We've got a beautiful world with an aesthetic I personally love, an interesting setup and a story with great cinematics, satisfying crunchy combat, mixed with excellent exploration, loot, and progression. What's not to love? Well, we're getting to that. To give some context, whenever I try and analyze a game, or really anything, the biggest tool in my toolbox is the simple question, why? The first time I asked it here was with the isometric camera. Why choose this for this style of game? And the answer became clear not too long after. The team at Moon Studios have proven exceptional in Metroidvania level design with the Ori games, and the isometric camera allows them to transition to 3 dimensions while leveraging that unique talent for locations where each frame could be a painting, and where they cleverly hide shortcuts and hidden paths for those who are willing to pay more attention. Some of the camera's positioning can be a problem in combat, and so can be the very small, difficult-to-see lock-on marker. But I think the choice of isometric perspective keeps the game unique while still allowing for some very clever design and doesn't compromise the combat that sits at the heart of the game. But that question of why, which I'll be asking a lot, will become very damning after a little bit. After the game's tutorial, you'll reach the city of Sacrament, which serves as your hub. Several quests will unfold, and you'll be given 2 objectives to pursue, along with unveiling the main progression systems of the game. While you level up and assign points, and you'll probably do this in order to meet the equipment requirements for certain weapons, a lot of your power comes from upgrading your equipment. both from upgrading the stats of it directly and from socketing in gems to give them modifiers, and in general there's a very big emphasis on randomized loot in the game. Weapons and armor come in 4 variants: normal, special, cursed, and unique. Normal items have no modifiers, but they have more gem slots and more rune slots on the weapon side. With more gem slots, you can add things from more resistances to elemental damage for weapons, or more HP, reducing stamina costs, or even generating focus or lifesteal. Special weapons come with these sorts of things randomly applied to them already, but you have less gem slots. Cursed items come with much stronger versions of these effects, but with one big negative effect as well. And unique items, which here function as legendaries, have no negative effects, some strong positives, only 1 gem slot, and they have all 4 rune slots already filled in, meaning that you can't customize those runes at all, but normally they come with that full suite for versatility. You can also enchant normal items, turning them into a special or cursed item when you do it. You get 1 roll at this, so if you want a specific weapon with a specific set of affixes, you're going to farm a lot of them and then keep rolling. And the game wants you to hunt for your favorite weapon with a perfect roll, and then collecting materials to upgrade that at the smithy with a more traditional, give me some gold and some items and then I'll make the stats go up. The why for this system is twofold. The first reason is because affixes on loot that can break the game and define playstyles is fun, but also because it provides a way to endlessly play the game, and that can be a double-edged sword. So let me reiterate before I begin with my constructive criticism spiral. I think No Rest for the Wicked is a fun, if often frustrating game, with some amazing ideas and absolutely wild potential. If what you see in gameplay looks cool, you'll probably end up like me, enjoying it more than you dislike it, but with a lot to criticize. I recommend you first check if it's going to make your PC try and fly to outer space, since there's been many complaints about optimization and performance, and hey, give it a go. If you want to hear me dissect why the design decisions in the game hurt it so much, then the rest of the video will still be here. And if you're just curious about my very long list of improvements I have for the devs, you can check that chapter out near the end of the video. So let's talk about your base and all of the different systems that feed into upgrades. In a mixture of Fable and more traditional survival crafters, or maybe because of this perspective it reminds me of V Rising, you need to deliver materials in town in order to rebuild and upgrade the shops and facilities for all of the vendors, and upgrading them will have them offer better services, more stuff to do, and better inventory to sell you. You can also unlock some quality of life improvements for movement around the town of Sacra. But to do these upgrades, you have to head out around the world to places you've already been to and cut down trees, dig up holes, and mine ore. Each node of resources is exhausted after use, and you have to wait around or explore further for them to replenish. Once you've collected enough, you head back to town, deliver them, and then you have to wait a real-life hour for the first upgrade, and a real-life 4 hours for the second, and I assume that we would have to wait even more for the higher levels of upgrades. I don't know though, because those aren't in this build of the game yet. Those subsequent upgrades require better resources that you can only obtain from different areas of the map that are higher level. And you'll probably want to have a better pickaxe, shovel, and axe in order to use those resource nodes pretty efficiently and quickly. And listen, I already dislike this idea of MMO-light design where I have to run around the map over and over to collect resources, but it gets worse. I mentioned that you don't have any replenishable resources like an Estus flask. So this, I assume, is also meant to be a moment to gather resources for crafting, but the game won't even allow you to enter a flow state of mindlessly collecting things. Sometimes it's because you need to manage your limited inventory, and sometimes because you need to repair your equipment. See, you might not drop souls when you die, but your equipment loses durability. This means you can mine or cut down around 4 or 5 nodes before needing to go back to town to repair, meaning you will have to teleport to town, walk to the smithy, repair it, walk back to the teleporter, teleport back, and continue on your path. And you can only teleport to the most recent checkpoint you've touched outside of town. You can also buy a house in town and you can furnish it, including things like chests to store items of all sorts, and also production? You can buy things like sawmills and anvils and furnaces in order to craft and build out your equipment yourself. Although one of the more interesting parts of this is refining materials, be that raw materials you obtain from resource nodes or drops from monsters, which you can put into these things like, for example, a furnace that's going to smelt your ore into ingots. And of course, you have to wait a certain amount of time for your furnace to smelt it, and you can't really put that many in, so I don't know if what they want is for you to build 10 furnaces and put in tons and tons of materials later on, because there's not really that many to farm, and this isn't an open world or a randomly generated map or anything. This isn't Valheim. This is confusing to me. The point is that you're forced to run circles around this map, hunting for resources, and whether it be because you collected too many of the building resources, or you filled out your inventory with other things, maybe some of them that you want to process, or because you need to repair your equipment, you're going to need to head back to town, and then go to the house to drop stuff off, or go to the smithy and sell some stuff and repair. You're just going to have to go back to town a lot. And because all of these construction projects take real time to finish, you want to get all of them underway as quickly as possible. And that means you'll probably trap yourself in a loop of farming in what is an incredibly tedious way of circling around areas you've already been to just to get the materials necessary. Either that, or you'll give up and just keep playing to progress the story and get back to the good parts of the game. But when the difficulty increases dramatically in the next zone and you realize that you need all of these facilities to upgrade your weapons and armor, well, then you'll go back to farming. And you might think that durability has a purpose. You might have asked the question, why is this here already? Or you might have figured out that there is an easy fix to it. And honestly, no to the first question and yes to the second. Later on, you'll be running the same dungeon on a loop to farm, and you'll simply be forced to waste a minute or two every 1 or 2 runs to repair your weapon. Or you just run the risk of having your equipment break. Now, there is an easy fix. Right from the start, the moment you reach Sacrament, you can build out a weapon with a rune that is very cheap to buy that allows you to repair at the cost of focus. Doing this is not hard or expensive or anything, it just takes reading through the available runes for sale. But here pops up the question again. Why? Why do I need to do that? Why can't I just not do that? If the whole durability system here is a punishment for dying, but it can be sidestepped by just having a very basic secondary weapon where you can just repair everything whenever, what's the point of the punishment if I can just sidestep it this easily? Alternatively, if I don't sidestep the durability punishment, it's just a very annoying thing that forces me to go back to town to interact with things like it wasn't enough that my inventory is very limited and I need to micromanage it constantly, or the fact that I should be placing things to process or to upgrade because they take real time to do, so I better leave that doing itself while I go out adventuring, which is the fun part. This whole durability system isn't a question of me getting good. If I'm busy getting good, if I'm engrossed in the game, learning patterns and getting better, if I'm having fun, but I'm dying throughout it because that's part of the natural learning process of these sorts of games, why am I forced to stop, go back, and repair? Why am I forced to do that, even when I've built out a character that can't be touched and that one-shots everything? I just constantly need to repair anyways because hitting things makes the durability of my weapon go down. Now, I think the answer that the team has to why they've put in this system is because they want you to go back to town and get caught up in other things. They want you to engage in all of the little timers around town and pick up different quests and bounties that they have because yes, there are daily quests and daily bounties in the game. They want to remind you that you should be upgrading your vendors and things like that. But here's the thing, even though you that's listening to this video at 1.5 times or 2 times speed might think that I sound like a baby, I'm actually a big boy, and I can go back to town without you hounding me about it by literally preventing me from playing the game. I can choose to go back because there is cool stuff to do there, and not because you keep reminding me to do that forcefully. I guess this is better than a constant tutorial pop-up interrupting gameplay and telling me that I should upgrade things, but still, not great. I mean, if at least the tools didn't have durability, and also if I had an infinite stash next to the shops, or if I could hold 999 of each resource, or hey, even if at least all of my chests in town were magically connected to all of the vendors, so I could access everything that I've accumulated, even if it's tedious to accumulate, at least some sort of quality of life into something here would be nice. But right now, there is a lot of friction between getting all of the inventory progression systems working together. I respect how this is laid out, and I understand the reasons for it. You want systems to dump gold into. You wanted to have customization of your houses, and you wanted to have processing facilities and inventory management. I understand why it's there and why you want to push people to use them, but I don't think that they currently justify their existence. They are way too time-consuming, they are way too annoying, and they are things that I actively dislike doing, in grand part because of that lack of quality of life. And there's a thin line between it not having much quality of life and feeling like a game that was designed around it being a live service. I mean, there's endless loot rerolls, daily quests, timers, and resources that you need to farm in order to fund your constant dungeoneering for loot. But it doesn't have the live service environment, and it also doesn't have the endgame goals at the moment to justify any of these systems. To top it all off, I don't really think this is what the game is good at. It's not where it shines. It's good at exceptional level design that you traverse through with thrilling combat, not at retreading the same ground an infinite number of times. And having all of these systems that feel like they waste my time in a mainly single-player offline game doesn't sit well with me. I understand that they might work better later on, but there's just not enough content to really keep that wheel turning at the moment. And even if it does end up justifying itself later on, these are questions that we should ask now, because the game in its current state just isn't very fun when you have to interact with these systems. Because, make no mistake, this game is very early access here at launch. While it's not very buggy, it just doesn't have too much content. There's a total of 3 zones with 3 dungeons, one of them being the repeatable endgame dungeon. Loot at the moment goes up to tier 3, and the third resource you can collect is silver, so I'd assume that the game intends to go all the way up to a tier 7 or similar, or I would hope so. You know, go up from silver to gold to platinum to adamantium and unobtainium, I guess. Having said that, all of the content that is in the game is excellent the first time you play through it, but it's not that good on the 12th time. And you will have to play it 12 times to get all of your resources, unless you just sit around AFK to wait for things to respawn, I guess. At the moment, depending on speed, skill, and efficiency, you'll reach endgame around 15 to 20 hours in, and that is because there is a lot of padding, and the place where there's the most padding is actually at the endgame. The endgame dungeon is a series of rooms culminating in boss fights. There's no checkpoints throughout these rooms, making that trek to the boss just to die all the more painful. But if you beat it, you get 2 unique items. The rooms are all handcrafted, but you don't get the same rooms nor the same order of rooms each time. I'd say there's currently around 10, maybe 11 room layouts, and you get 8 rooms each time you go through the dungeon or so. And, I mean, there's already pedestals laid out in this area for what I imagine are higher tiers of the dungeon, and I can easily imagine that this dungeon, with enough enemy variety and maybe with 60 to 70 different rooms to shuffle around, will take up hundreds of hours of my life. I love it. But to give this dungeon a try, you have to spend a consumable. Those are fallen embers. This dungeon is also where you get the best loot and the most experience. So if you're at endgame, all you want to do is power up your gear the best you can and keep running this dungeon. But if you run out of keys, those keys are random drops from chests or enemies in the rest of the world. The world that's way too easy for you at this point and gives very low experience and terrible drops. Or, if you're level 30 already, they give no experience and terrible drops. But you have to farm this world over and over to access that endgame. This is accompanied by another example of just stretching out content beyond what's needed for this type of game and for what its strengths are. Just while in the endgame dungeon, which is called the Crucible, you'll probably get tons of cool weapons and gear, as well as some uniques, but you won't be able to use most of them due to stat requirements. While there are no classes in No Rest for the Wicked, there are some very clear archetypes within the game. Stats are clearly designed around you putting some into HP, stamina, focus, and equip load, and dumping all of the rest of them into a combination of 2 stats or 1 main stat. You can see this from the requirements on weapons. The game wants you to go full strength, full dex, full faith, or full int, or an even division between 2 of those, and you will get an assortment of weapons that fits each of those categories. Once you put a point into something, that point stays there forever, so you might be locking yourself out of reaching the stat requirements for a specific weapon later on. Or if you were lucky enough, like me, to get it right on the first time and just commit. In my case, I went for a Dex and Faith build because it seemed to have hammers and those felt really crunchy. You'll have access to the weapons of that quote-unquote class, but you'll also be teased constantly by all of the other cool weapons from the other ones. And if you want to try out all of those shiny uniques you're getting in that endgame dungeon, well, you have to start a new character. There is no option for respeccing at the moment. At all. So you better plan your character ahead of time and know more or less what you're going for. The game allows you to leave items in a community chest that anybody else within your realm can access, and that of course includes all of your secondary characters. So they want you to level up a completely new character with a different archetype and then get the items from the chests. Yay. I don't think it's too much to ask to let people respec at some cost in order to experiment and try stuff out. But instead, you're locked into every skill point you assign forever. And look, I don't want to criticize the loot system, even if sometimes it seems at odds with some of the design of the game, because I like this loot system. It's a curious mix, but one I think works. And I love systems that allow me to break games, because that's fun. I think most people enjoy that. By endgame, I was running with a giant cursed plague hammer, and I added a rune to it that allowed me to throw it like a boomerang. This hammer also healed me on hit, and it generated focus on hit, to the point where I could throw it forever without worrying about my focus bar. And as you can see in this endgame gameplay, I can permanently stunlock the last boss. The negative of my cursed hammer is that I would lose experience every time I got hit. But since the level cap is 30, I don't gain experience anymore, so it has no negatives. Now I press 2 buttons and win the game, and that to me was fun. Also, that rune for throwing the weapon doesn't seem to work properly with two-handed weapons, so I throw an invisible weapon while keeping my hammer in my hands, which I still find pretty funny, although I would prefer if I threw the hammer because it does look really cool when you actually do it. And I get it, you have these different classes, kind of like an ARPG, and you want people to commit to those classes even though you really didn't tell us that. But I don't think that in a game like this that isn't competitive on a seasoned server, that you have to lock players out of respeccing, especially because a lot of those games that do have seasons and stuff do allow you to respec at least up to a certain point. I would have loved to try out more weapons and experiment and find a different playstyle I liked, but I didn't want to start a whole new character for that. I mean, in the end I was lucky because I made the right choice for my one character going forward. The legendary katana you can get is Dex and Faith, so that's a heads up to people who like hammers and katanas. Also, let's go. You have great taste. Yeah, hammers and katanas forever. I just wish I could dual wield a hammer and a katana. Also, look at the katana moveset. It's sick, honestly. This game is so cool sometimes. But if I had made the wrong choice and I got that katana, I would really want to try out that katana, but I'd have to level up all over again. And that doesn't seem fun, especially because maybe I commit all of this time to leveling up this character to use this katana just for it to suck or something. Just let me respec, please. Moving on to a different subject, let's talk about combat, because I've seen people take this in many different directions. Most people seem to be finding the game very difficult, and I disagree. It's not because I'm really good at video games. I'm pretty good at some video games and also very bad at others. I'm trying to judge this objectively. I think the game's difficulty is pretty okay most of the time, and then it has dips into being too easy, although that is dependent on the loot you get or what build you chose, and then there's some moments of absolute garbage enemy design and some absolutely rage-inducing encounter design. I also think part of the difficulty people encounter is that constant need for resources and cooking for healing, as well as the frustration you get when you end up in that loop. But a lot of one-on-one and two-on-one battles work great. But there's a couple of enemies that, while a lot of fun to learn and fight, still just have too much bullshit. The polearm wielding big guy is great fun, except that if you ever fail to dodge his grab, he will one-shot you. At max level, with 850 armor and a good amount of points put into HP, that grab still one-shots me, so I'm pretty confident in saying that it's an instant death attack. Similarly, these fat guys that spit out worms, well, they have a chain attack that if you get hit with one of them, you just die. The current final boss has a one-shot, and it's also the first attack he does, so it feels great to mistime it and not dodge correctly that first attack after the 8 rooms to get there, just to instantly die after having done all your pre-fight buffs. It's great. Also, hitboxes can be hard to gauge, and there's a couple of them that are just bullshit, like, for example, the pools of poison or plague that the final boss spawns. I'm not touching it and I'm dying. What is happening here? And then there's also stuff that's just annoying. These witches serve as persistent long-range artillery, but if you get close, they do one of two things. They either constantly teleport away, or stand still and blast you with high damaging fire. And you cannot break through this attack. You can't stagger them out of it, except with the weapons that have the most poise damage. Why am I smacking this witch over the head with a club and not interrupting this attack? But speaking of that teleport, let's get to the Lords of the Fallen of the problem. That's another game that made some critical mistakes when trying to follow in From Software's footsteps. These witches can teleport over chasms, and your lock-on will follow them, and you don't have ledge protection when you're attacking. So you can be in combat, mashing out your combo, the witch can teleport, and then you will turn around and jump off a cliff. Not good. And that's falling off when you're in combat, because outside of it, the precision that is required for some of the platforming sections is a little bit too much, especially when the punishment for missing some of these jumps is death, which means a lengthy walk back to where you were, and potentially a small interlude for you to go back to town and repair your equipment. But the real pain points in difficulty is when the game can pit you against 5 different enemies. 2 of them have the ability to 100 to 0 you, and 1 of them has the ability to stagger you if you dare attack their shield. With these 5 very menacing threats all at once, you just end up dodging forever, praying you win the war of attrition to get your damage through. And look, Dark Souls can put you in these situations, but normally, it's your fault. You ran past some enemies, you failed to strategize around them, but especially later on, Dark Souls 3 forward, if you're overwhelmed, it's probably your fault. In No Rest for the Wicked, much like in Lords of the Fallen, the game intends for you to fight all these enemies at once. Getting an aggro range of 1 will trigger all of them. And in places like the Crucible, which is a literal arena that you can't run away from, you will enter it and all 5 enemies will start attacking you. This is not fun. This is frustrating because it doesn't feel like you overcame a challenge if you win. It feels like you got lucky against something that wasn't ever meant for you to win. And that's especially heightened by the fact that the Crucible is RNG, so that same room with 5 very tough enemies could have been a room with 3 easy ones. So overall, expect some larger than desired mobs and some death by falling. It's not nearly as bad as Lords of the Fallen, but still it gives me flashbacks, and I think both of these things should be addressed, and I have notes later on. In a more in-depth analysis of combat, I love the general feel of it. The weight and momentum of each swing, how different a lot of the weapons are, just the general feedback is excellent, but there's a bit of a lack of variety. A lot of fights boil down to waiting for enemies to attack and hitting them in a small window after their attack finishes, with some of them, like shield enemies, being very punishing if you attack them slightly outside of that window because they can stagger you. And you can normally only get 1 attack in after you perfectly dodge 4 attacks from the enemy, because they will either jump away after that first attack, hit you, or, in the case of something like the shield enemies, they will immediately start guarding, and if you hit them twice, they will stagger you on that second hit. If you wanted to do a magic build, you still need to follow this same method of combat in order to charge your focus, which you need to send out your spells. That is, unless you get some crazy item drops to fuel your magic and focus management, and that means that it's basically not viable until a good bit into the game with some good loot. But if you want to pursue that, you are locked into building in that direction. You can't swap later, remember, no respeccing. Staggers in general just don't happen very often, and sometimes when you do manage to stagger an enemy, it'll happen just for you to get in the last hit. And this seems to be a deliberate tempo the game wants. But it also means that going for big, heavy-hitting weapons is the most rewarding decision. If after dodging 4 times you can only get 1 hit in, you want to make that hit count. You want to do it with a weapon that can instantly stagger an enemy. And while spells or dex weapons have rune skills that can go through mechanics or just outright stagger an enemy in 1 hit, the runes on those harder hitting weapons are just as good at that or better. And you can probably equip the best runes from those other weapons on your big hammer. The key difference is that when you're generating focus, when you're just normally attacking the enemy, With the big weapon, you can slam people consistently and power through some of their attacks and stagger them more often after you dodge those first 3 or 4 attacks from them. The same tempo of being on the defensive, getting one hit in, and going back to the defensive affects parries as well, because parrying an opponent might give you 1 or 2 hits, so you don't really get a big payoff or the ability to outright kill an enemy after you parry them. You need to parry the same enemy 2 or 3 times, and the reward for the risk you take isn't outright killing them. The reward is not having to dodge 4 times, hit once, and repeat, and instead, you parry, hit twice, and repeat, which is faster, sure, but I don't think spending less time on a fight is really the best incentive for players. The typical stun locking of an enemy that allows you to get a whole combo string through in a Souls game doesn't happen here unless it's with those very heavy weapons. So I think that enemies should be staggered into that combo more often. Let's say the second time you get a hit in after dodging their attacks, you should be able to get a full combo off. Even if the enemies had more health to offset that and have the total time of the fight be more or less the same, I think that it doesn't feel rewarding to the player to be on the back foot all of the time, slowly getting one hit in every chance they get. You can turn on the poise meter, and I have no footage of this, but trust me, there is a poise meter that you can see, and it's really telling where the strengths are for that stagger system. If anything, for a game that plays like this one does, I would really like to see higher poise damage when interrupting enemy attacks to give a more viable playstyle to the faster weapons. A really well-timed hit on an enemy should allow you to get off big damage for that risk, instead of being a way to sneak in damage and then go back to dodging. But hey, I'm a Dex player, so I'm biased. And I just wanted to lay some of this out. I overall think the combat is great. I just think it could be better, but as always, balancing these sorts of games is really difficult, and even more so when you add in this type of loot system. So Godspeed to the developers. I just think that the core loop of dodging and getting one hit in should be reworked or have easier ways to have different primary interactions with the combat system. Also, we can't talk about an early access game without talking about bugs. It's not really that bad. I had 2 crashes, which is not much, to be honest, and I did get stuck under terrain and warped out of the map in an area that has already, just 24 hours after the launch of the game, been sectioned off so it doesn't happen to more people, and the devs are working very quickly. They've already addressed some of the issues with repairing and durability by reducing the amount of durability you lose and having repair powders drop more often, although I still don't think it addresses the whole issue, to be honest. But I did also encounter this bug where I would climb up vines and then I would immediately start climbing down them again in a loop, and I couldn't break out of it. After much testing, my best guess is that sometimes when you mantle up at the end of a climb, the character is placed too far outwards on the ledge, which the game detects as you wanting to go down it and not just floating in the air to your death or something. Or at least that's what I think is happening after examining it, and it's easily solvable with moving those zones around or more aggressively warping the character forwards when you mantle. Also, there's some inconsistencies because I can run towards a ladder and start climbing down it, but sometimes I will run towards a vine and then jump to my death. So, goodbye cruel world, I guess. Also, in the funniest and then not funny at all bug of the year, after some time with the game running in the same instance, and I say that because if I went out to the menu and back in, this would reset, but enemy weapons would become huge after they died. And this got progressively worse. It starts out being comically oversized, and then as I kept playing, they would get bigger and bigger and bigger until I couldn't see anything on screen after killing an enemy, and that's really funny. I think that's really, really funny, except when I died because of it. But all in all, not that many bugs, so good job on that front. I mean, there's a lot of finicky jank, especially with platforming, but I'll talk about that more in the notes. In the end, all of these quality of life issues, the balance, the lack of a cohesive loop, and an identity that feels pulled in 5 directions adds up to a game that can feel impeccable one moment, almost like a mixture of Dark Souls, Zelda, Hades, Fable, and Diablo, all combined into one, and then it can feel like an annoying adventure game that wants to pad out its content with ill-thought-out systems the very next moment. There's just a lot of questions, like why am I waiting 4 hours to build this upgrade? Why do you want me to play multiple characters? Why do I have to process materials? Why am I forced to redo content over and over in order to progress and farm and get stronger to overcome the barriers you present. Why am I wasting my time when you've shown me how good this game can be? I ultimately don't understand what these systems are leading to. I can see the vision kind of hidden there, but I don't see how many of these systems would help get you there. And I did enjoy my time enough with this game to make this review, and I'm desperate for more content down the road. I am really excited for this game, and I really like it, despite the problems I have with it, which really aren't that big. They just feel worse than they are because the good parts of the game are excellent in my opinion. It's what makes that constant reuse of areas that you want me to farm feel so bad. Because if I want to revisit areas, I will. Don't railroad me into it. Don't force me through the progression systems of the game to do things that are not fun to do. Don't force me with inventory management, resource collecting, crafting, timers, processing, and return trips to town with restrictive build options in a heavily RNG-dependent loot game. Because when you're going through the core loop of moving from checkpoint to checkpoint, figuring your way out through an environment, taking down different enemies, and solving puzzles, this game is truly special. And look at the core combat. Imagine this in that endless dungeon with a lot of variety to express yourself and to keep experimenting with different weapons and builds. Look at this combat. It's sick. And I want this game to reach that potential. So, after having criticized a lot of stuff about a game that I really like, here is a very long list of suggestions to the developers. Nice and organized. I don't claim to have the right answers because I am not a game designer and my experience in making games is very limited. And I have tremendous respect for pretty much any game developer. It's basically black magic that games get made at all. And I love what the team has here at its core. So I just want to give my suggestions and my perspective because even if I don't have the answers, I think that that information is valuable. And if you think that it is too, remember to hit the like button so we maximize the possibility that this actually reaches the developers. Also, it helps out the channel. And one last note before my list of suggestions, I'm ignoring performance and aspect ratio and a couple of other things because those have been acknowledged by the developers. Although I do want to remind you, for all 15 of us out there, that 32:9 is an aspect ratio that exists and people game on. Please don't just add 21:9 if there's a chance to put in 32:9. I know that there's not many people that actually play in 32:9, but I will love you forever if you remember us. So here's the list. Number 1, rework or take out durability. If I can suggest something to keep durability in, it's to charge for durability repair at any checkpoint or fire pit. And maybe even offer an option for a toggle that automatically repairs when you respawn and just takes the gold out. And make repairing when you're in Sacrament free. This means there's still a penalty for death, while reminding players of the benefit of going back to the city. It's also a nice way to avoid the downward spiral of resources and costs, which I remember being a huge problem in games like Bloodborne, where you could run out of blood vials and also not have any souls to buy more blood vials because you died. So now you were stuck without vials, but you need to go fight in order to get souls to buy more vials, and that sucks. So having a way to repair for free would be valuable, as well as maybe offering free meal packs in the city if the game detects that a player just doesn't have any healing resources on them. The meal packs could be very, very weak and just enough to get people off the ground, because really for the longer periods in the game, I imagine you want, 40, 60 different items in your inventory that you can restore HP with and buff yourself with. So it's not like offering 3 meal packs would break the game with people just relying on that. I mention this because I've seen a lot of complaints on difficulty and people getting stuck on this spiral. I personally don't see it, but if these people exist, then this is something that needs to be addressed. Number 2, restructure the overall progression towards collecting resources for the town meta upgrades and reconsider those timers, or at least their length, even if it's just while the game has less content available. Number 3, maybe give players the first level of the food vendor earlier and easier so they have access to buying healing items faster. So far, you've made one of the more basic foods cheaper to buy, but I think you need to tell people they need to get the chef up and running in order to comfortably buy food. Number 4, add a respec option and find a different way to incentivize multiple characters at endgame, but let me experiment, let me choose what my next character is going to be, and then let me play the game again with that character because I enjoy the experience of going through the game. Number 5, streamline inventory in a way that doesn't make me hate the inventory menu or collecting resources or building things. I really think that all of the storage options in town should be connected. That's just a quality of life feature. It's fine if I have to unlock it later, but have that exist. Maybe reconsider the maximum number of stacks of an item because 20 feels very low for how many items you can collect in a basic run through an area. Number 6, add toggles for interactables. When I have 4 loot orbs stacked on top of each other, I have to reorganize my inventory so that I can pick up something useless that I don't want, so that I can make one of the loot orbs disappear just to see what's in the next orb and then repeat this process to check all of the loot. It's even worse when I'm forced into picking up some junk because I want to interact with the door and the loot takes priority over me opening the door. Just add something where I can hold down the button and then cycle through the different options. Number 7, make gold an automatic pickup. There is no reason for a player to not want to pick up all the gold, at least yet. But even with that, I find myself not doing so because I don't want the junk that comes with that loot drop, or because I'm too lazy to click through every loot drop when it all has so much potential junk. So just give me the gold. If it's something that I will always want to pick up, don't make me manually do it. Just give it to me. Number 8, rebalance one-shots to mostly take them out. It makes sense that if I'm under-leveled and under-geared and I didn't put any points into HP, that a boss can one-shot me. But there is no world where if I did put a lot of skill points into HP and I am wearing heavy armor, that I can get one-shot by anything at all. I've never heard of somebody that has done that, put all the points in, put effort in their build towards the defensive side of it, and then got one-shot and said, yeah, that was cool, I really liked getting a one-shot there. Really makes me want to keep playing this game. Number 9, rework the encounter possibilities of 4 to 5 enemies at the same time, especially in the Crucible. I think that it's a problem right now in balance overall, but especially in the Crucible where you're locked into those fights, it's not fun and it's not challenging. It boils down to rushing the long-range target or the easiest target to 100 to 0 with a combo and then recovering and then struggling and trying to wither down the pack. Like I said, it doesn't feel like you overcame the situation by being good at the game or by theory crafting a good build for it. It just feels like you were under stress and made it out barely alive in a situation that was unfair, and I don't think it's rewarding to the players. And if you want to have challenges regarding build craft or how you tackle a specific scenario, I think those work much better when they're scripted and they involve an environment where they play out in, and not just because they got sprung out on you on a randomized dungeon. Number 10, add ledge protection or stronger protection for when you're attacking. Nothing hurts more than the lock-on going crazy or making a mistake with the lock-on and watching your character attack off of the map. Number 11, the feedback for the lock-on system is not good enough. Right now, your lock-on is determined by, well, where your character is facing, but also a tiny, faint little red orb on the enemy. But when I switch, I lose track of it very easily. And when I'm fighting 4 or 5 enemies, I'm not really sure who I'm attacking and end up attacking into a wall. I think there should be a nice audio cue for this, a clunk of some sort, when you change, and probably the moment you change, a bigger, more noticeable, maybe a red square, similar to how the UI is done with the squares on their sides, or diamonds, I guess, and just have the shape of one of those appear over the enemy for about a second and then fade out or something. But I need more clarity to know exactly who I'm targeting with the lock-on when I'm switching. Number 12, make the behavior of running off of a ledge consistent. If there's an option to not jump to my death, I think that should be the option that the game always chooses. Number 13, add some light, or if it's already there, which I don't think it is, a stronger form of platforming or jumping assistance. If I'm very clearly jumping towards a platform, and on one side of the platform is a drop to my death, and on the other side of the platform there is a slightly different drop to my death, I want to go to the platform. I don't care that I technically held the analog stick at 112 degrees and not 106 degrees. I obviously don't want to die. And this is a game where the camera angle can lead to finicky judgments, so you should help the player out in those situations and just automatically throw them towards wherever they would want to logically go. I'd rather get frustrated that you assisted me too much and had me jump at the wrong location than you not assisting me at all and for a very tiny error losing my progress and having to run all the way back to that place. And number 14, I have no idea what the full vision for this game is, but the roadmap says that the next step is PvP. We can currently farm unique weapons, but we have nothing to do with them. I want to use my katana. Everybody wants to use their katanas. This is a very frustrating endpoint for this early access release. I mean, the big story gets set up and other areas are teased, and we get access to this limited form of the Endless Dungeon, and we get unique weapons that are really damn cool, but nothing else to do with it. It doesn't leave me wanting more, it leaves me unsatisfied. If I can tell you what I would like, and this is my video, so I'm going to do that anyways, a higher level cap with some new areas to explore, and most importantly, higher variation and new rooms in that Endless Dungeon would be my priority. If this build of the game had introduced the Endless Dungeon and then let me farm unique items before setting out to test those new unique items in a new environment, and then I could enjoy using them, I'd be much happier, and I'd probably be willing to do the whole thing over on a new character just to experience that loop differently. Just so I could level through the game using a different build and then obtain my unique weapon as early as possible in order to do as much content with it as I could. And if respecking is in the game, I could choose what build I want to replay the game on by respecking and figuring out which are the items I like the most, or which unique weapon I like the most, or anything like that. I'm sure that later on, when there's a lot more areas to explore, hopefully, that it will make more sense in a natural flow of things. As I keep exploring, I accumulate keys, and then I take a break to delve into the dungeon a bit, get some new gear, power it up, and then continue exploring. But right now, that doesn't feel good, because there's nothing really cool to do in the rest of the world except waiting for those keys to drop. I think it's imperative to make that exploration, or in the worst case, that retread of well-worn ground, feel rewarding, instead of the current slog that it is as we hunt for fallen embers. And maybe taking level grinding away from the Crucible and having it only be in the rest of the world might help with that? I'm just spitballing. I'm looking for a less worse situation, because right now I think it's dreadful. Obviously, again, not a game designer, and there is a very large risk of developing your game with a lot of community feedback, because we can have some terrible ideas, and I openly accept that, but I really sat down to think about a lot of these things, and the only ones that I'm more hesitant on are that final one. But that's mostly because it's very dependent on how the rest of the game is going to work with that Endless Dungeon unlocked. And that's it. That's my feedback. I hope that how much I enjoyed this game, how much I think it's great, was conveyed in this video, that it was palpable throughout it, because I think this game is amazing. It just has a lot of problems that keep it from the overall greatness it could be. And keep in mind that my analysis, as always, this is what I always do, it comes from a place of good, of wanting great games for all of us to enjoy, and I really like this opportunity of giving this feedback to an early access game that I am really excited to keep playing, that has developers that seem to be listening to the community very carefully. There's a version of this game in a year or two that is one of my all-time favorites in the genre and possibly in games, period. And I can't wait to play more of it as the game evolves. And also, hopefully, this video was entertaining, or at the very least educational throughout it, for the general viewer. And keep in mind that if anything that I say in this video has any impact, be that reaching the developers or just making you think about game design and the medium we all love so much, it's all because of the over 25,000 of you that have chosen to subscribe and given my voice reach. I am grateful every day, and I thank you. If you're not subscribed and think that what I do is cool, subscribe to the channel. I have a couple more reviews this month, a huge list of retrospectives for the end of the year, and the usual reviews and news on the biggest games coming up. I also want to give a special shout out to my patrons, Islar, Mika, and Kite Jr. They're the first members of the Thieves over on Patreon, where you can support me for $1. That's the only tier. And it gets you on the patron wall in all of the short videos and a verbal shout out at the end of the longer ones. Each one of you that joins is a tiny step in me being able to quit the day job that I hate and make more and better videos about stuff I love and feel passionate about. So Check it out in the link in the description if you want to join. I've been Mug Thief, thank you for watching, and I will see you again very soon.